it started last night, and it'll pick up again tonight, and then it'll go until Sunday night.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So everybody, we are live, and we have got Dr. Vera Tarman here with us today. And she was just telling me about how she's having this huge festival in the background, and they've decided to quieten down in honor of our live.
Yeah, that's right.
What festival have you got in the background, Dr. Tarman?
It's the Gay Pride Festival, and I'm right at the corner of the heart of it. So
oh wow,
yeah, they were doing the sound checks, but it's quiet right now.
Oh my goodness. Well, if we hear festivities, then we will just feel that we can get into the mood, and feel motivated about everything we're talking about today.
Okay,
good. Okay. All right. Well, everyone, hello and welcome. I'm Tamsin Murphy, registered dietitian and head of content here at Nutrition Network. And I'm really honored to be hosting this important discussion today on International Day Against Drug Abuse. And while we often think of addiction in the context of alcohol or narcotics, today we're highlighting the area that's actually just as devastating, but far more hidden, and that is ultra-processed food addiction. And our guest today is someone who has been at the forefront of this field for over 2 decades. She's a respected physician, a researcher, an international speaker known for her clear science-based insights into how food, particularly refined and engineered food products, I don't know if we can actually call them food, we can talk about that, how these frankenfoods can hijack our biology and drive the same addictive patterns that we see in substance abuse. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Vera Tarman, author, clinician, addiction medicine expert, here to guide us through the stages of addiction, amongst other things, what they look like in real life, and how we can support recovery at any stage. Dr. Tarman, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for asking me.
So I just have to say that I had to have Dr. Tarman on this live after I watched her exceptional lecture in our latest professional training in sugar addiction. It just absolutely blew me away. And I've been in the space of therapeutic carbohydrate restriction and low carbohydrate diets for quite some time now, I think since about 2012. And, I became exposed to sugar addiction back when I co-authored a book with Corin Thompson. I think that was 2016 on the topic of sugar addiction. And I still, when I listened to Dr. Tarman's lecture, she taught me a whole lot of new things. And that's despite being in the space for so long. So I was blown away. And I think you all just have to hear some of what she has to say. And that's what we're hoping to give you today.
Well, thank you. What a great intro. Okay.
Oh, thank you. All right. So I think let's get started in the light of today being the International Day Against Drug Abuse. Let's just start by opening about why it's important to talk about food addiction today alongside drug and alcohol addiction.
Well, you really nailed it when you said that it's hidden. And I've been in the field of addiction medicine for, 25 years now. And I consistently see people transfer their addiction from alcohol or cocaine to sugar when they come into treatment. I mean, it's almost inevitable, especially I want to say especially amongst the male population, but that's not true. It's the whole population. It's just the male population. They're so happy that they're gaining weight, and they don't realize that the weight that they're gaining is visceral obesity, and it's not the good weight. But actually, everybody gains weight. And so it's the fact that it's hidden. But I think particularly now, it's a really good time to talk about it, because in the last year, we've had just an abundance, a tsunami of research and discussion, academic discussion on food addiction in a way that we haven't seen before. I'd say the last 2 years, we had the UK conference on ultra-processed food addiction, the consensus. And then maybe because I submitted a paper in that, I started to pay attention to more and more and more papers. So nobody can say that it's not being addressed scientifically, because it is, and especially in the last year. So I think it's a great time to talk about. It's very timely because we are at the tipping point, finally.
Finally, thanks, in no small part to the works that you've been doing, I do want to direct everyone to your latest publications. Just last year, Dr. Tarman published 2 amazing publications on some of what we're going to be talking about here today. And she's also got a book called Food Junkies. So if you want to find out more, please go and read that. But yes, I feel like we are at the tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like you've touched on something which I know we touch on in the professional training with food addiction, which launched last month, which is addiction interaction disorder, right? Because that's what you're basically saying. You think, people they think, oh, well, I'm not taking drugs. I'm not drinking alcohol. I'm just eating, and then I gain a bit of weight. Oh, so what? And potentially some people, as you said, might actually be happy about that, which I didn't foresee. But, not realizing that actually it's one disease, it's one condition. Just with different outlets, as Bitten says. Yes. So I think that's really great that you mentioned that. And unfortunately, it's still not in the diagnostic manuals, the DSM or the ICD-10 or 11. I don't know where we are now with that. But so if we're at the tipping point, Dr. Tarman, do you think that very soon, just like gambling was added to the diagnostic manuals, do you think that we can expect ultra-processed foods to be added to the diagnostic manuals in the not too distant future?
I would like to be optimistic and say yes. How can it not be the case? But we continually get rebuttals. There was just something, it actually hasn't been published yet, but it's about to be published, saying food addiction doesn't exist. So there's still enough contention in the literature to make the argument that prove to us that this isn't an eating disorder. Prove to us that this isn't just something that we already know and you're just adding another problem. You're just adding another dimension that's just going to complicate things even more. And we're consistently having to say, but we're getting it now. We're now finally getting the research to say that, this is not an eating disorder. An eating disorder can coexist with this. Not to say that eating disorders don't exist, but they can coexist with it, or they can be on a continuum. But this is its own unique condition. And I would like to say that this will be the year. We keep hoping, but I don't know if it will be. I don't know if it will be yet. Yeah.
Well, hopefully this is the year, but if not, then very, very soon. Yes. So I think we've started touching on, that food addiction, or I don't want to call it food addiction, ultra-processed food addiction or sugar addiction or whatever you want to be, not food addiction. I'm just making that distinction for our viewers. And I want you to explain to us, how is it different from things like eating disorders, or let's say, just eating occasionally, like, okay, well, I'm feeling pretty sad, so I go and eat a whole slab of chocolate, but I don't do it very often. It's not like I then do it every day or every week or even every month. Or, some people are just sometimes you enjoy a Christmas dinner and you have multiple plates of dessert and you just enjoy it. Like, how is eating addiction different from these other forms of, I suppose we can call them binge eating, these ultra-processed foods?
We could call it disordered eating. And if we just say disordered eating, that can fit into a number of different categories, different ways of explaining this. And I guess, because we live in the food environment that we live in, this ultra-processed food environment, which is inherently addictive. It's made to be addictive. That there's people in the food industry making a lot of money to make these foods addictive. So when a person then eats somewhat addictively, it doesn't mean they're addicted to food. They're just eating almost as you would expect, because they're eating foods that are addictive. So it's harder to have just one. You can have 3 or 4 instead of just one. And I wouldn't say that that's food addiction, although it is inviting food addiction to come into the scene. And I think that a lot of people are at the level of, there's 2 things. There's eating addictively because of the foods that we're eating, and the foods are manipulating our hormones, which I can talk about a little bit shortly, so that we're eating addictively. And if we were to stop eating those foods, like eat a low-carb food plan or a keto food plan or a carnivore food plan, we would get out of that misalignment of hormones and then eat properly. Because we weren't really food addicts to begin with. That's one thing. And then, of course, in the in the world of disordered eating, we're constantly having to say, well, there's that piece, and then there's also eating disorders. And eating disorders is a whole other psychological realm. It's usually psychologists or departments of psychology where you'll see people in this field, and they're talking about food addiction, not food addiction, disordered eating, binge eating, bulimic behavior, as really emotional ways to deal with turbulent emotions. They're ways to comfort, or ways to manage, maybe not even comfort, but to manage. So I have a history of trauma, or I have a history of psychological distress that's happening right now, and I'm using food to manage my moods. And that can look addictive, but it might not be. It might be exactly what it is. I'm using food as a comfort, because food is comforting. Like, the neurobiology of it is that it is comforting. There's no question about it. It's supposed to be comforting, because otherwise, we wouldn't eat if we didn't enjoy food. But food addiction is a separate thing. That's when a person is compelled to eat despite their mood, and sometimes even despite their hormonal dysregulation. Like, we'll find that people are eating even on a keto food plan addictively. So that but it's because the processed food industry has gotten into the keto world and is offering those keto bars and keto bombs and whatever, and that's making what should be a non-addictive food now addictive. So anyway, it's something about the food itself, not the psychology of the person. Although it's not to say that the person can't have an eating disorder or misuse eating as a way of managing their emotions, but they don't have to have that situation. It can just be, I'm fine, but then I have something, I don't know, here a Girl Guide cookie or some kind of a cookie, and now you want more than one, and you find that once you've had 3 or 4, something happens, and it's the same as the something that happens when an alcoholic has 1 or 2 drinks. Now they crave more. It's one way to say it is that the person who's had the second drink is not the same as the person who's had their first drink. Something happens to the whole mechanics of the craving and psychology, or I guess the limbic system, in such a way that now that person is fueled by, depending on where they are in the stage of addiction. If they're in the later stages, one can trip them up for a long time. That's what we call a relapse.
Okay, so there's so much to unpack there, and I definitely want to dive into the stages of addiction in a little bit of time, so I'm not going to do that, but I just want to point out some key things that I'm taking from what you've just said, which is you have your eating disorders or your disordered eating, and you can imagine it kind of like a Venn diagram circle.
Yes.
And then you have your other Venn diagram circle next to it, which is your ultra-processed food addiction, right? Or your addictive eating.
Yeah.
And they are separate circles, but they can be pushed together and have an overlap in the middle. Yes. Where you can be an addictive eater or an ultra-processed food addict, if you will, or just an addict, because as we said, it's one condition, and that you then overlap with disordered eating. So you can be a bulimic and be a food addict, or you can just be bulimic without being a food addict necessarily.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And because of that makes it very difficult to make a case for the ICD or the DSM, where they're saying, look, we've already got this disorder. Why do we need another one? And we're saying we do need another one because there's that separate dynamic, which is for those people who don't have body dysmorphia, who don't have concerns about their weight per se, who just, they were fine and then they had something and now they're, down the rabbit hole of eating too much. And we need to address those people as well.
That makes so much sense. And also, having read some of the literature in the space, early on already, I think Nicole Lavina in the, probably 2010 already, maybe before that, forgive me, I can't remember the exact date, but I remember she was speaking about rodents having, all the all the signs and symptoms of addiction, from compulsive eating, obsessive or compulsive eating, tolerance, withdrawal, seeking behavior, all those kind of things that are within the diagnostic criteria apply to ultra processed food addiction or sugar addiction as well. Is this so also in humans, Dr. Tallman?
Absolutely, yes. And the good news is this is part of what's happening now with the research now, is we're finally moving from rodent research, which, by the way, is fair game in psychology. So much of what we know is through rat research, so we can't say that that's not appropriate research. But we're now looking into the clinical world of people, of human beings. And if we follow a food addiction food plan, does that actually change the person's cravings over time? And that's the research that's happening right now.
Well, that's wonderful. And what a wonderful time to be in this space.
Yeah.
So you also touched on, before we move into your stages of addiction, which I really want to get into because I think it is not spoken about enough or at all, really. And it is very important to inform treatment decisions when it comes to ultra-processed food addiction. So I want to leave enough time for that.
Yes.
But I want to make sure we're fully grasping the food addiction or the ultra-processed food addiction concept. And I know you mentioned, you touched on hormones, and then you touched on neurotransmitters. And I think from reading your papers, you basically say there are two drivers of eating, right? You have the hedonic.
Yes.
And people can think of that from, the derivative hedonistic, I suppose, hedonic driver, and the homeostatic driver. Homeostasis is being in a state of balance.
Yes.
So you have the hedonic pleasure-seeking driver, and you have the balance driver of eating. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah. So the homeostatic model, which I actually just like to think of, because homeostasis is everywhere, so it gets a bit confusing. There's even a homeostatic model in the hedonic model. So I actually, generally when we say the homeostatic model, we mean the hormonal model. And by hormones, we mean insulin and ghrelin and leptin and CCK and other hormones of satiety and of hunger. And I focus on primarily, I focus on ghrelin and leptin as being the hormones that mainly drive our appetite and satiety, that are good, that they're ghrelin lets us know when we're hungry, and leptin basically contributes to satiation. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but let's just make it simple. If we eat normal foods, I shouldn't say normal because normal foods are ultra processed foods. If we eat healthy,
evolutionarily appropriate foods, perhaps.
Evolutionarily appropriate foods, then ghrelin and leptin would be driving our appetite perfect. Like we would eat until we're full, and then we would stop, and we would only eat when we were hungry. But what's happened is that the ultra processed food industry has manipulated some of those drives, sort of flattening the leptin and increasing the ghrelin. But more than that, what they've done is they've introduced sugar, and that brings in the insulin drive. And insulin is not supposed to be a hunger hormone, but when you're hypoglycemic, in other words, you're crashing because you've had a big sugar load, half an hour ago, you're going to be hungry because fuel is down, and hunger is a warning sign that you better eat. And so but the way that you eat is addictive, like you eat quickly, too much, more than you need. And that is classic addiction-like behavior. But it's actually not addiction. It's just your body trying to reset yourself, get your glucose back in order, and all the rest. So that's the sort of homeostatic model, and the food industry will mess up the insulin. We call it, insulin resistance and everything that we talk about metabolic syndrome. And I think actually that part of metabolic syndrome is the beginnings of food addiction, although nobody's actually said that. I'd love to write a paper on that
Yes, please.
that there is some level of food addiction that should be part of the metabolic syndrome component. But on top of that, or in addition to that, we have the hedonic, which is the dopamine, endorphin aspect. And foods trigger our endorphin and dopamine, as they should, because if they didn't, why would I bother eating other than that it gives me pleasure? And if we were eating evolutionarily appropriate foods, I would only get so much dopamine that would make me want to eat. And then when I'm full, the leptin actually suppresses dopamine and I'm not desiring it anymore. But ultra-processed foods heighten the dopamine, especially pure sugar, pure flour, heighten the dopamine in such a way that I eat even when I'm full. We can call that false hunger or just hedonic hunger. And that's when you have the two of those together, those two drives, which are instinctual drives that have been hijacked, basically, that's the term we use in the addiction literature, by ultra-processed foods, then we're caught. We're caught in the lures of these foods because both of those things have been deranged towards eating more than we need to. And when you see that, and then we can start talking about the stages over time, the development of that, then you get into loss of control, all the definitions of what addiction is. Enhanced dopamine, that's craving, tolerance, you develop a tolerance, so you need more of something pleasant that you use. 1 or 2 cookies was enough. Now you need the whole box. Impairment, you're starting to eat despite the fact that your doctor said you've got diabetes and you stop, but you can't stop. And if you do stop, you get into withdrawal. And if I can just say here, so many doctors will say there is no withdrawal with sugar, but yes, there is. It's so the way that you see the withdrawal. I actually talked about this today in my class that I do with, I work at a treatment center, and I always do a sugar talk. And I said, how would you feel if I said tonight, no snacks, no night snacks, no treats, which are always chips and things like that. And they were like, no way. But if I would have asked them how many people think that they're sugar addicts, they wouldn't have put up their hand. But if I had asked them, how would you feel if you would not get that thing that you expect to have at the end of the day to sort of enable yourself to be able to fall asleep or whatever, you get a rise, you get a reaction. So it's not the type of addiction that's, you mentioned it, it's hidden. You see it when you take the substance away because there's a withdrawal, and the withdrawal is agitation. How will I sleep tonight? How will I cope through the rest of the day without my little treats? It's like cigarettes. It's very much like cigarettes, sugar addiction.
And I think, what I want to add here is having interviewed, I don't know, many of you who watch these lives may have watched the interview with the 3 eating disorder ladies, 2 of which were actually, to be honest, all 3 of them were definitely food addicts. They've done the sugar, and one of them's even been qualified with Bitten Johnson, the sugar, which we are now running, by the way, at Nutrition Network. If you want to become a certified sugar diagnostician, you can do that through us now. So if you want to do that, please contact us via nutrition-network.org. Yes. Let me just say that again because I got a bit word jumbled. Support@nutrition-network.org. Anyway, back to this. I also wanted to say each of those 3 ladies, it was probably the best. It was just the most amazing discussion. They all spoke about food noise.
Yeah.
When they weren't eating those addictive foods, they had constant chat in their heads, thinking about when they were going to get, what they were going to get.
Yes.
And it wouldn't switch off. It was incessant, and it stopped them from being able to work, being able to have relationships, all sorts of things. And I think if that isn't like a form of withdrawal, then I just don't know.
Yeah.
And then something else I wanted.
It's not a seizure. It's not a seizure. It's not shakes and sweats, but it's agitation. Yes, and it's that food noise. Exactly.
Yeah, and it was incredibly distressing to speak to them and hear about their distress. And that's something else I feel is really wrong with the medical space, is we don't speak or listen enough to the people who are afflicted. Mm-hmm. We've traditionally just kind of spoken from apart and above and said, this is what you have. You can think back to, Freud with these hysterical women. You don't speak to the women and find out what their husbands were doing or anything like that, or why they might be acting hysterically, or what, society may have done to them. You just label them. But, as time goes on, we realize, we need to actually speak to women and find out what's going on. And maybe men can also act hysterically under certain circumstances. And similarly, we've done that to all sorts of conditions. In fact, I don't know a condition we haven't done it to. Yeah. Autistic spectrum disorder, addiction. we need to really listen to what the people with the afflictions are saying, in my opinion. And then something else I wanted to add was, as the listeners out there, I would like you to think about something that Dr. Tarman just said, which is your satiety or feelings of fullness, and how when you should, in the homeostatic model, the hormonal model, you should be able to realize when you're full and when you're hungry, due to leptin and ghrelin respectively, right?
Yes.
And I think if any of you can think about eating a steak, let's say you have a steak, just a steak on your plate, maybe with a chunk of butter on it, maybe, but you have a steak and you eat, or you're at a barbecue or a braai and there's just meat. Okay, just meat. And you only eat the meat. There's a certain amount, no barbecue sauce, hey? I'm just talking about the meat, maybe some salt. Yeah. And you eat the meat, you're going to stop at a point. You're going to stop. You're going to be like, okay, I am full. I don't want to eat anymore. And that's going to be a very clear point. I'm sure any of you have had just a piece of meat on your plate, have gotten to the point where you can't even finish it. You're like, okay, I am done. And the same goes with drinking water, right, Dr. Tarman? You drink a certain amount of water and you're like, okay, I don't want to finish my glass. I'm done. It's very clear, right?
Yes.
I think that to me would be perfect examples of this natural homeostatic model. But then if any of us think about when we're sitting in front of a series feeling sad and we're in the ice cream or the chocolate or the chips, or crisps, we just don't stop. Then, or even alcohol, the same, where we don't get that same clear, distinct, I'm full or I'm done feeling, right? Is that the hijacking kind of that you're talking about?
Yes, that's the hijacking, exactly. The dopamine has kicked in and overrides our natural satiety signals. It overrides them. It just tramples over them. And the person ends up eating far more than they could. And I mean, you can still do that even without dopamine. If you eat foods that are highly processed, there's no crunching, there's no digesting. It's all eaten in 5 minutes, because it only takes 5 minutes to eat that food, and that the leptin takes 20 minutes to kick in. It's like a medication. You got to wait for it to work, and you've already eaten 3 times as much, and then you're full. You're so full. So
overfull.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Overfull. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what's also interesting is this is an experience that everyone, I believe, or almost everyone, can relate to. But I think a bit like alcohol, maybe everyone has overdrank alcohol, right? Especially maybe in their university days, or I don't know, they've overdone it, but not everyone ends up an alcoholic. And I think that distinction is very important as well, which is as what you're saying, Dr. Tarman. And I just want to make sure that our listeners are digesting that, pun intended, because if you drink, you can drink too much alcohol and it can be harmful use or disordered drinking, right?
Yes.
But and you might do that on occasion, but it doesn't mean necessarily you're going to become an alcoholic. Whereas some people's neurology will mean that they do become an alcoholic.
Yes.
And would that be similar as well with food? So everyone might binge on that ice cream when they're feeling sad, but not everyone is then going to result in getting the persistent food noise and all those diagnostic aspects of addiction, right?
That's right, because there might be a genetic predisposition, number one, but even more important, it's all to do with exposure and frequency. And this is where, being in stage 1 and 2 is useful to know, because especially kids are not in any stage yet, but if they are bombarded with food, which they are, they're going to get into a stage pretty quickly. And I'm not somebody who would say you can't have sugar at all. I actually would like to be quite honest. It's not food. Sugar is not it's a toxic substance, and it gets in the way of us enjoying real food, like strawberries, cherries, apple, like fruits. It gets in the way of that. We want something more potent than that because of our tolerance. But early days, if a person says, look, I want to have a little bit once in a while, if they truly only have a little bit once in a while, then they won't, unless they're predisposed in some way, or they have a previous addiction, which is a form of being predisposed, then they might be able to get away with it, because the body does allow for some leeway, out of that homeostatic model, yeah. But if it's a consistent thing, then the body is going to recognize, okay, there's a new normal out there, and I've got to adjust to that new normal. And that process takes a while. This is where the stages happen. And as long as you don't allow that to happen, you can have a few here and there. Yeah.
Yeah. So speak us through these stages, because I think we're moving towards that very clearly. And you're speaking about, children and, almost, the food virgins, if you will. They haven't had necessarily, when they're born, haven't had the exposure to our toxic food environment yet. And then they ideally haven't been exposed to ultra-processed food. And maybe if the child, as you say, goes to a birthday party once every few months and eats a bit of it, many or most children might be able to just be fine with that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Then how do we work our way through these stages, and what are the implications of these stages, Dr. Tarman?
Well, okay, so it's all got to do with exposure and frequency, and I guess the amount of exposure. So it's a homeostatic in the hedonic model. That's why I'm saying it's not a great term. When there's a certain amount of dopamine that's being challenged, we're given the grace to have the occasional superlative day or, extraordinary day. And it doesn't mean that we need to have an extraordinary day all the time. This applies to drugs as well as food. Our natural dopamine. I usually have a chart where I say our natural dopamine is between 1 and 200, and occasionally we can have this dopamine, which is a neurochemical of motivation, of excitement, of anticipation. We can have super duper days that, wow, this was just a really good day and I'm really looking forward to this, and nothing happens. But if I expect that on a regular day because I get that through my drug use or food use, then my brain is going to start recalibrating to that new normal, because it's not supposed to be that way. And it's going to try to diminish the effect of that new normal, which we call tolerance, so that super experience now is muted to a less super experience. That's tolerance. That's just the body doing its job. That's it. It's not anything but that. Then a person has now become somewhat tolerant. And if they stop there, they'll get back their desire. It's kind of like if you have a cake or something, you don't want an apple anymore because the cake kind of took over the stage. But if you don't eat anything abnormal for the next few days, that apple is delicious again. So you're okay. But if there's a consistent cake and candy and etc., where the dopamine levels are higher, and basically sugar and flour, then you're going to, if you want to feel the pleasure of eating at all, like everything becomes flatter because you need that higher amount. So that's like an anhedonic effect that comes with the tolerance. And so now you need more to get the same effect. And so that's now moving from a stage 1. So stage 0 is you're just abstinent. I like that term, food virgin. You're a food virgin. I love it. Okay, that would be like stage 1, just nothing. And then stage 2 would be you have some exposure, but you can recalibrate fairly quickly, and it's okay. You may discover when I eat particular foods, I eat more. So there's cues, there's warnings, and maybe you're eating a bit too much so that you might even be gaining weight. I don't think you would yet have received, become pre-diabetic, but there's things, but you can kind of rein back. That would be the time to rein back, by the way. But then when you move into stage 3 and you get that anhedonic effect where I need something to just feel okay, this is getting into the scary range. This is getting into the, if you want treatment, you may need to think beyond just a cutting back. It may still work, but not likely. It depends on other variables. Like if you have an eating disorder, a lot of people, when they have an eating disorder, find that restricting spurs off the eating disorder, and then it makes it hard to, like, they don't know what to do because one will trigger the eating disorder, and another pattern of eating will trigger the food addiction. They're in a difficult place, and then they'll need a coach or somebody to help them. But as we move along, if a person continues to eat unchecked, they end up eating more. And now to get something, to get some pleasure. And now they find that even if they eat more, the pleasurable amount you just can't match it. It's a bit like the drinker who says, it doesn't matter how much I drink, I don't feel the effects anymore, except I just get drunker and more miserable, but I don't feel that euphoric effect anymore. It's gone. The drug didn't work anymore. The food didn't work anymore. But so I'm flat. My mood is flat, but I have to have it, because if I don't have it, I'll have that withdrawal that we talked about. And in my paper, I talk about, I use George Koob's model, and George Koob's is an addictionologist who wrote a lot for the American Society of Addiction Medicine. He's part of the Nora Volkov team, and he wrote about this model that I'm talking about. He called it the allostatic model of the hedonic model of addiction, where you need more and more to get the same effect, and if you don't have it, you get this anhedonia, what he called hypercataphia. It's a term that he made up, where he said it's kind of like the line from which you go from a recreational to a addict. So you're a recreational heavy user to an addict, because when you cross that line, the substance no longer does anything for you, or very little. But if I stop using it, the withdrawal is worse than not having it at all. So you're in a rock and a hard place, because you're having all the negative consequences of being later stage, like diabetes and obesity and depression, and I can't get anything. I can't get no satisfaction. But all I get is misery. But I'll get more misery if I stop. So I don't know what to do. And that's often when people seek treatment.
What a terrible stage to be in. So let's start at that stage. What do they do? Because it seems like they are between a rock and a hard place. What do you do at that final stage?
Well, that's, in the addiction world, we say it's when the drug stops working, and you can't I can't remember the exact phrase, but you can't win either way. So then what you have to do is seek treatment. And the thing about addiction, I think it's actually probably pretty common in many mental disorders, not just addiction, is we have an inability to recognize how much trouble we're in. I think that happens with depression and anxiety too. The person is depressed, but they don't really see how much of it is I don't want to say self-imposed, but like, this is where cognitive therapy becomes useful. You just change your thoughts, but you don't think that your thoughts you don't think that you can control your thoughts. I don't know how to exactly say that, but anyway, our ability to control our behavior gets lost when we're hijacked, but we don't see it. So I think that this is the kind, when we're talking about stage 4, or even like late stage 3 moving into stage 4, we're looking for somebody who needs somebody to help them, because their ability to make decisions has been hijacked, and they need to essentially abstain from the substance and go through proper withdrawal. I mean, it's unpleasant, but it is time limited. Nobody's going to do that willingly. And if you follow an intuitive eating plan and all these things, they will undermine that. Like, I think that the best would be to actually have an inpatient treatment for a very late stage, because it's so difficult. But if you can't afford that, or if it's not available, to do something intensive outpatient. I like Bitten's sugar tool is really good, because it helps to identify, because the person doesn't see how much trouble they're in. It helps to identify, this is somebody who's in trouble and who will need to go through all these extra efforts, like intensive outpatient therapy, which might mean taking 3 weeks off of work. Like, you would do that for alcohol, you would do that for cocaine. We can do that for sugar. Why not? Why don't we do it for sugar? Because the good news is that if you can actually get through the withdrawal with help, I don't think it's possible to do it without help, but if you can do it with help. It's only 10 days, 12 days, 2 weeks for the worst of it to be done. And then after that, it's just making sure you stay sober.
Wow.
Yeah.
It does sound incredibly intense. And so I'm hearing you, either an inpatient clinic, even, with ultra processed food addiction as well, or a very, very intensive outpatient program where you are monitored, you're accountable, probably have peer support. You have all these strategies you're learning, accountability, all that kind of thing. And what I'm understanding is this is the final, we're talking about people who are on that final late stage addiction where you no longer get pleasure from the substance. No. You just need the substance to maintain your baseline mood, right?
Yeah, and we see these people, these are the people who are still smoking cigarettes with their emphysema tanks, like their oxygen tanks, thanks to emphysema, they're still smoking. That's, I mean, we see that and we go, yeah, that's a person who's addicted to tobacco. Oh my God. But we see the very same thing with food addiction. It's just that we don't often see the consequences. But this is the person who's got diabetes. They may have already had a limb amputated. They've already had a stroke or 2 heart attacks, and they're still eating. Like, how is that any different? It's
well, they're still eating those foods.
Yes.
And then let's go. Let's just take a step back now, down to stage. I think that was stage 5, right? Down to stage 4, which is like the start of addiction. I'd say the initiation to moderate level of addiction. Yes. Where you are still getting pleasure from the substance, in this case, ultra-processed food, sugar, refined carbohydrate. Yes. You're still getting pleasure, but I imagine you are eating more of it, right? You're probably eating quite a bit of it in order to get that pleasure, or using quite a bit of whatever the substance is, right?
Yeah, because
that's that level.
Some tolerance has already developed, so you find that you're needing to eat more to get the same effect. Yes.
So what do you do with them? Do they also have to do this 2-week intensive inpatient or supervised withdrawal phase, or how would this inform clinical practice if you're dealing with someone who's stage 4 addiction, or the start to moderate level of addiction?
So I would say never do more than is necessary. I guess it's a bit like medications. You start low and go slow. If you do, like, the danger here is that if you're going to have to take a proper history. If you ask for too much, like abstinence, like, I mean, in some cases you have to get the person to weigh and measure their food, because their ability to determine whether they're actually hungry or not, their ghrelin and leptin, what is that? Like, what is a normal?
Their brain's been hijacked, right? As you said.
Exactly. They have no idea. So sometimes they have to go to that extent. But I would never ask a person to go to that extent and scare them away. It just doesn't work. So often, I mean, a proper history is such that I would say to the person, look, knowing that denial and that inability to see how serious their situation is, you have to always take that into account. But just to say, look, do you know yourself? Like, if you have a little bit of this, do you think you can moderate this amount? Now, sugar, no. I would suggest that the person cut back on sugar right from the get-go, just on the basis of health. Like, there is nothing healthy about eating refined sugar, nothing. But if the person, and if they really insist on having sweet, then I would say, let's work with sweeteners. Let's do that at least, and as a harm reduction maneuver. If they're not willing to do that, then okay, we can start with the sugar. But I'm not expecting a lot of results, because the sugar will just continue it's like an alcoholic, just asking them to have a few. You can try it. It's do the research. If you're not getting much effect, I would get rid of the sugar, and then later you might have to get rid of more. One of the things that I've seen is, okay, so you're going to universally, there's no need to have sugar, like except for the person's willingness, and maybe you can trade off for sweetener. Then try to get rid of the flour. There's not actually any reason for that either. But if they're willing to quit the sugar and do, like, you're going to negotiate in these early stages. Later stages, you're going to include more, because it's been my experience that if a person progresses, their window of opportunity for foods that are not trigger foods gets smaller and smaller and smaller, so that somebody who's at late stage can't eat grains, they can't eat dairy, they can't eat cheese anymore, they can't eat nuts. Like, there's a lot of things they can't eat that somebody in earlier stage can eat. So that's an unfortunate reality, but wouldn't restrict more.
It sounds like it's just increasing levels of strictness. So as the addiction once you've tipped over into addiction, right?
Yes.
Which is, I think, stage 4 in your model. Once you've tipped over into addiction, it sounds like abstinence is a must.
Yes, it's
you
a
can
must.
beat around the bush a bit and based on what they're willing to do and say sugar, a little bit of sugar, or, but it's not going to be enough. It sounds like abstinence is the way they have to go.
Yes.
With help, because of the denial and the shame and the neurology that's promoting their addiction.
Yes.
But now, and then also, as you say, the window of what they can tolerate that isn't a trigger food, it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
It certainly changes. Like you have to, like, I want to say that it certainly changes over time and over age, and even over like life changes, like menopause for women means that they're often less able to tolerate grains, for example.
And, I don't think this is exclusive to addiction. I think we can actually generalize this to many conditions. If you look at diabetes, for example, the further along you are with diabetes, the more you have to restrict your carbohydrate because you're more carbohydrate intolerant. If you catch it early, you might be able to have a bit of nuts and maybe a little bit of dairy. But if you have gone for years diabetic, you likely can't handle any nuts or dairy, depending on how far along you've gone. And the same goes for certain bowel diseases. I've seen that as well, where, in early stages, they can tolerate certain things. If they're far along, the tolerance for different foods just gets less and less and less and less. So I think I'm seeing a kind of pattern with this, Dr. Tallman.
And that's why I think that food addiction is, in a way, a sort of a manifestation of another manifestation of metabolic disorder. Because we see that
it's a metabolic disease, which is exactly what this whole metabolic psychiatry thing is saying, right? This whole movement with metabolic psychiatry saying that there is a huge metabolic element, if not a metabolic underpinning, to mental health conditions. We're talking, clinical depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and if that's the case, and then we know that the neurological conditions also have metabolic underpinnings. We know Alzheimer's, type 3 diabetes, Parkinson's, then, and even the neurodevelopmental disorders like autistic spectrum disorder have at least metabolic components, if not underpinnings. Then why are we even surprised when it comes to addiction, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I would like to say something else to make sure that we talk about this, and that is the question about when a person becomes abstinent. So let's say they've acknowledged, okay, I've got to get abstinent, and they go and they get the treatment, whatever that might be. At some point, can I have sugar again? Can I go back? Not as a relapse because they couldn't control themselves one day, but because they just say, it's been 5 years, surely I can go back. And one of the things that we would say this in any addiction field, that you run the risk. It's a serious risk because there have been changes that have been made, neurological changes that have been made. That means that you may not be able to go back. And there's a couple of models that have been used. One of them is it's a kindling model, that the idea of once you have a seizure, you're likely to have another seizure. So using that same principle, once you've had cravings, or you're more likely to have enhanced cravings the next time. Allergies work the same way. The more exposure,
everything does.
The more likely you'll have a response. But even after a period of abstinence, there is a reset, I guess, a homeostatic reset, but I don't think it ever goes back to normal. I think that it's just like the diabetic. Once you become a diabetic, you become a diabetic in remission, cancer in remission. I don't know if you're cured, you're in remission. And similarly with addiction, you're an addict in remission. So then you're not an addict while you're not using the substance. You're fine. You're like everybody else. But when you have the substance, there seems to be a prolonged cue sensitivity, heightened cue sensitivity. So people, places, things, you're more prone to using sugar again, or something else. Like, it's not just sugar, like we were talking about earlier on about general addiction, interactive disorder, like any addiction, you're more predisposed to. So, and I think that doesn't go away. I really want to emphasize that. It doesn't go away, which then leads to, what are we doing to our children? Because if the children are taking sugar in with the frequency that we're giving it to them, I'm not talking about occasional, but everyday use, we are predisposing them to further addiction, not just of food, but of other addictions.
Wow. Well, I think everyone needs to just let that sink in, because, you just have to look around at what children are being fed these days.
Yes.
In school, but also by their parents.
Yeah.
Ultra-processed foods are an absolute norm. So these children, as Jason Fung, I remember at the first conference I ever saw Jason Fung speak in South Africa, Cape Town in 2014, he said that these fetuses are incubating in insulin.
Yes.
So that when they're born to these mothers who've been eating all these ultra-processed food, they're already have, then this reactive hypoglycemia when they're born and no longer have their supply of sugar and insulin.
Yes.
And I feel like when they're out of the womb, the same thing can happen. It is happening when you look around you. And if this is predisposing our children to addiction, then how surprised can we be that the addiction levels are rising and rising? And similarly, if you're drawing a corollary to metabolic syndrome, Dr. Tom, and then how can we be surprised that metabolic syndrome and all of those chronic diseases of lifestyle are also just continually rising? We're doing it to our babies.
Yes, I believe we are. Which is why I'm saying, although maybe the children could tolerate sugar here and there, why do it? It's toxic. Like, it's not necessary.
Yeah. And you see a tipping point often. I'm just looking around you. I mean, some people, the tipping point might be later in their lives, but for some people you might see, okay, they hit 5 years old. Then you can start seeing the weight gain starting, or maybe it might be teenagehood where you start seeing the signs, and it doesn't have to be weight gain necessarily. It could be all sorts of signs of insulin resistance or inflammation, be that, joint pain or irritable bowel syndrome or, psoriasis or other skin conditions. It could be various forms depending on what your weakness is. But you see it at different ages depending, I think, on the genetic propensity. Yeah. And then Dr. Tom, what you were saying about, this, you're always an addict or you're always a diabetic, but you're in remission.
Yes.
I also kind of think that with what you were talking about, it reminds me of, when water comes down a mountain after a big storm or a big rain, how it makes these rivulets, and that is always there. That rivulet, whether it's now drought, it might, have some plants grow on it. Maybe it'll build up some more residue or some dirt, and it might not be as deep as it was when the rain was falling. But if the rain falls again, it's going to find that same furrow and come down that same furrow. It's not going to find a different furrow.
Yes.
And that's why I think, if once your body has found its dysfunction, if you will, it's like that rivulet. It just always goes there. If it is addiction for you, then, you eat those highly processed addictive foods and that will be your outlet. If it is diabetes, you eat that and you will end up with a diabetic episode. If you have inflammatory bowel disease, you eat that and you will end up with a flare-up. If you have, an arthritis or gout, you're going to end up with, a flare-up of that. I think it just makes so much sense, and we see it in clinical practice all the time, like you said.
Yeah. Yes, that's well said. I was using the concept of kindling, which is the idea that you when you make a fire, you have to put the wood and everything, all the kindling, and for the addict of whatever addiction that the person has, the kindling is set, and all they need is the flame.
Oh, yeah.
The kindling is always there. You don't have to set it up because that neurobiology is already set. Ready to go.
Well, there we go. There's your flare, quite literally, right?
Yeah.
So this is all, quite depressing, to be honest. So I would like, before we're about to end, I would like to end with, more of a message of hope.
Yeah.
What do you feel is the positive
that
people can take away from this conversation and what we've been talking about today?
Okay, no, there really is a positive message, and that is that you can get out of this mess. First of all, recognize that sugar is a toxin, a refined sugar. I don't mean the sugar in fruits and vegetables, and that will depend on that person's ability to process carbohydrates. Some people even those carbohydrates are a problem. I recognize that. But for the most part, taking ultra-processed foods, which are not foods, they're food products, getting rid of them, and then you go back to your own biology, your own evolutionarily appropriate foods, and then you reclaim all those joys of the foods that you're eating. You'll also reclaim having weight that won't be going up and down anymore. You may not be as skinny as you'd like to be, because that's a cosmetic demand of society, but you'll be the weight that you should be, which is anywhere from, I don't know, a BMI of 20 to maybe 25. I don't know. It's relatively normal, and your mood and your sense of well-being will be enhanced. And all that only takes the start of 2 weeks, get rid of that withdrawal, and then recognize that was a poison, that was a drug episode that I was in, and now I'm going to become part of a sugar-free life. And you'll get support from that. And we're starting to acknowledge sugar, like alcohol-free, as I think it's up to us to make it look attractive, because it is attractive. Ask anybody who lives a sugar-free life. They're not going to be saying, oh my God, I have all these aches and pains. I feel so, I've got all these horrible conditions. They usually talk about how much better they feel. And the problem is society pushing the stuff back onto them. And there's where we need the support, is to say, that's what you're doing. That's what you're eating. I don't want to eat that way anymore. And then if you can do that, if you can say no to those pressures, then you reclaim your life again. Like, this is good news. This isn't bad news. And guess what? It's without surgery. It's without medication. It's not, you don't have to pay anything. You just don't eat that stuff. Like, how much better news can you get than that? That's good news. People, when they hear this, go, oh no, it's bad news, because they're still in their addictive thinking of, I need this substance. But guess what, folks? You don't need it. And reclaim your power. And it's only 20 days away.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that is absolutely a message of hope. Thank you, Dr. Tharman, for leaving us with that. I think we're going to have to cut that up and put it all over the socials, because that is a message of hope. And, if you want to become a clinician who works like Dr. Tharman does, with addiction and with processed food addiction or sugar or carbohydrate addiction, then please take our courses. We have got 2 courses, one on addiction eating, which is like the Addiction 101. And then the second course is the professional training in sugar addiction, which is the one that Dr. Tharman does her amazing lecture on. And then we also are launching towards the end of the year, beginning of next year, the diagnostic training, which will include live lectures and groups with Bitten Johnson, where you become capable of doing diagnostics and treatment. And if you buy that now, you sign up now, then you actually get the first 2 trainings for free. So it's a bundle option. Now's your chance to do that. So please do that. Just email support@nutrition-network.org, and you can find out about that bundle. It's going to be absolutely amazing. I'm super, super excited to do it myself. It's going to be amazing. And I've learned so much from the likes of Dr. Tharman and the other amazing experts on these trainings. And I think you absolutely don't want to miss it, because you can really change lives. And addiction is, I know most of us have got an addict in our family or friends, and you can see how hard-hitting this is. And you can also see how almost impossible it feels to stop. And this is where having capable clinicians like Dr. Tharman, who have the tools, know what tools there are to put an addict into remission, or actually they have to put themselves into remission, but to help them get into remission using things like, relapse prevention strategies, which you'll learn in the trainings, and, support groups, breathing techniques, various, the neurobiology, the dietary strategies, the nuances, the individualization, then these trainings are really, really what you need to do, because addiction will be 100% accepted in the near future. And if you go into the literature, you'll see it's already there. Plenty there. So I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Tarman, for sharing your time and your unwavering commitment, to uncovering the truth about food addiction, because so many people just don't want to see it, don't want to look at it, don't want to acknowledge it. And you've really helped us understand that addiction isn't just about drugs or alcohol. It's actually about the brain. It's about biology and behavior. And when it comes to ultra-processed food addiction, the consequences can actually be just as serious. We're talking, you mentioned amputation in diabetes in this case. We've mentioned mental health conditions, depression, not being able to get out of bed, not being able to go to work. These are very, very serious implications, but what's even more powerful than those is your message of hope that you've shared with us, that with the right understanding and the right tools, that recovery is possible. And in only like 2 weeks, the worst is over in 2 weeks, you said, even in the most advanced stages, right?
Yes. I mean, it continues on after, but that withdrawal pain diminishes. The battle is onwards, but it's got to do with dealing with the food pushers, and it's the psychological stuff afterwards. Yeah.
So take our training to learn how to help people with that, or help yourself with that. Yeah. And thank you all for joining us today on this International Day Against Drug Abuse. And let's just keep challenging the norms, asking tough questions, and supporting real healing. Good night, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. And thank you so much for your incredibly valuable time and expertise, Dr. Tarman.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.